AI makes it possible to reach every individual person with a specifically tailored message that is absolutely impersonal, which is a great irony. It's like if you want to build a brand, you have to do some interesting things. Get out and have some experiences, develop an opinion. Using AI to build your personal brand actually creates you into the most average person available. So it's personal bland.
You're listening to the Genius Scouts podcast with Justin Oberman and Aaron Zakowski. Join us each week as we bring you exclusive conversations with the business leaders and innovators you need to know about, sharing the secrets that fuel their success and power their personal brands. Let's dive in.
Today, we are going to talk with and introduce to the world Andrew McLuhan. See, no recognition there. How about Marshall McLuhan? You know that name, just like vaguely? Andrew McLuhan, grandson of Marshall McLuhan, son of Eric McLuhan, it's beginning to sound like Lord of the Rings, joins us as the inaugural guest of the Genius Scouts podcast. And one of my favorite advertising mentors, Howard Gossage, I think would have appreciated this moment. As you know, Genius Scouts is named after the term that Howard Gossage and Jerry Fagan used for their consultancy. And back in the 60s, when Howard was running that converted firehouse agency in San Francisco, him and Jerry Fagan, their first client for both generalists, which was their consultancy, and their first Genius Scout was Andrew's grandfather, Marshall McLuhan. So back in the mid-60s, him and Jerry Fagan discovered a certain Canadian professor who appeared to be speaking in tongues about hot and cold media. And while most advertising men dismissed McLuhan or didn't know about him or thought he was preaching some sort of academic gibberish, Gossage recognized him as perhaps the most fascinating and prophetic thinkers of our era. Marshall McLuhan became the first client of Gossage's generalist consultancy, the original Genius Scouting operation, and Gossage took McLuhan from academic obscurity to the pages of Playboy and beyond, not as the centerfold, obviously. And not that McLuhan needed much help, but Gossage once remarked that McLuhan could write a paragraph you could read for 2 hours profoundly and still not understand it. So now, decades later, Andrew McLuhan becomes the first guest on Genius Scouts. He directs the McLuhan Institute and has dedicated years to cataloging his grandfather's and father's library. He is based in Prince Edward County, Ontario, and he lectures globally, consults with organizations, and publishes insights that extend the McLuhan legacy. The medium remains the message, though the mediums have multiplied like rabbits in springtime since Marshall McLuhan's time. And today's conversation promises to explore how ancient media wisdom might help us navigate our contemporary digital wilderness and those invisible environments that shape us while remaining largely unnoticed, like asking a fish about water. Given a lot of giveaways into things that are going to be said in this podcast, I believe. Gossage understood that this relationship between medium and message long before most. He knew advertising was a guest in people's homes, not an intruder, and he recognized that the real waste in advertising wasn't bad advertising, but advertising itself, that relentless intrusion that trained people to ignore. So here he is, Andrew McLuhan, continuing a legacy that Gossage helped introduce to the world. Let's see what genius remains to be scouted out of this man.
That's a heck of an introduction. I'm not sure we need to actually do the podcast now. I think.
Oh, yes, we do. I have tons and tons and tons of questions. I mean, this is just going to be a really fascinating podcast.
Funnily enough, I was actually speaking with my students last night. I teach a very extended, an insanely extended course on understanding media. It's 36 2 or 3 hour classes that covers every chapter in that book in depth. As you say, we can spend maybe not 2 hours on a paragraph, but we can spend quite a long time. We do a chapter a week, and it takes about 18 months to do the whole thing. which is, not for everybody. But as it happens, last night I was telling him a little bit about Howard Gossage and how Marshall McLuhan became a household name, not by accident, but by design. And to me, the wonderful part of the story, well, there are a few wonderful parts. For the first wonderful part of the story, which is almost unbelievable, is that Howard Gossage's partner, Jerry Fagan, was a proctologist by trade and an amateur ventriloquist. And that particular meeting of pursuits, I mean, if you don't find that funny, then we can just stop talking. It's a good way to judge people, really, just by.
You can't. Aaron's a former Deloitte accountant, so it takes a bit.
Oh, well, he's smiling despite himself, maybe.
I was waiting for the punchline. I mean, you set it up pretty well. So
that is the punchline, yeah. But that he, I believe the story is that he gave the book to Gossage, saying, "Hey, you'll like this." Gossage flips out about it, calls Marshall McLuhan and says, "Dr. McLuhan, how would you like to be famous?" And I can only imagine that my grandfather on the other end of the line said something like, "Oh, sure, that sounds good. Let's do that. Sure, why not?" Because actually, my grandfather had already realized that if he wanted to change anything, if he'd wanted to have an effect in the world, which he did, he wouldn't be able to do it from within the English department at the University of Toronto. He'd already gotten there. So he was trying to figure out how to do that. And here comes Howard Gossage offering to help him out. So sure, why not? And then Gossage brought him to New York, spend a few $1,000s of his own money, wined and dined people like Tom Wolfe. And all of a sudden people are asking what he sounds like, the greatest thinker since Einstein and Pavlov, what if he's right? And for the next few years, it was Marshall McLuhan everywhere. And again, the most remarkable thing about that to me is that it was not by accident, but it was by design. Gossage and Fagan set out to see if they could make an academic into a celebrity, and they did it, which is remarkable enough in itself. What makes the story good is the noble pursuit of it, because they weren't just playing some bet to see, hey, let's see if we can, raise this somebody into a celebrity status, make somebody a pop star, make somebody famous. It wasn't as, meaningless as that. But Gossage and Fagan, I believed that my grandfather, that the world needed to know him and his work, and they set out to make it happen. And that's the difference that makes a difference in this story. And as you say, it's quite bizarre that here I am, a third generation later, trying to do the same thing. I would say it's almost unheard of, but actually I can't think of another example of, it's not, I live in a rural area, and there's, there may be McLuhan and Sons farm, or mechanic shop or cobbler. Not unusual in the trades to have a multi-generational enterprise. Very unusual to have it in an intellectual kind of enterprise. Not that I'm not an intellectual, really. Or if I am, it's by a side or back door, not by the front door of academia. I'm a poet and a punk rocker and a father and somehow a hockey dad. And
maple syrup farmer.
I suppose my youngest son Virgil once called this place a word farm, and I love that because that really speaks to me. But yes, I am also a very small maple syrup producer, which is almost getting to the season of that, and I'm looking forward to it. But
one of the Canadian things I've ever seen somebody do was
right?
I was thrown once with Andrew put maple syrup in his scotch. Your grandfather was compared to Galileo and all of these people.
Yeah.
Why? Who cares? Why should we care about Marshall McLuhan today? And why should we care about what his grandson has to say?
Well, there are a few answers to that. Um, One of the answers is nobody knows, uh, be, because few people understood what he was trying to say. Um, but more people understand today than they did 60 plus years ago. Um, you know, in the 60s, when Marshall McLuhan said the medium is a message, people are like, what are you talking about? The message is the message. Um,
Can you
Today,
unpack that though? Like
Yeah.
the meaning of the message. People say that all the time. I
Yeah.
don't think Aaron
I mean,
understands.
I've heard Justin say it a lot of time, and we've actually discussed it a few times. And I think I've wrapped my head around that statement. The message, the medium is the message, but I don't really understand it. And I'm going to kind of represent our audience today, who probably is more in my situation than Justin's when it comes to understanding these things.
well, it's a great position to be in because the stakes are extremely low, and there's only going up from there. But
Exactly.
you know, I, I I spent some time in Brazil at the end of the summer doing a little book tour with some friends, and one of them put it that the medium is the message is kind of the E equals MC squared of our times. Um, I think he was dead on about that. The reason it's almost a shame to explain it because it's a lot of its beauty is in its simplicity. It's 5 words, for Christ's sake. The medium is the message. 5 words, and yet there's uh, worlds of meaning contained within them. Um, for a lot of people, it goes in one era out the other. But a lot of it rests on this word medium, and few people stop to consider what a medium is. And it's something I've taken to polling people about. For most people, when you say medium, they think, well, it's something in between, like a telephone or a computer, a way of communicating, of saying something to somebody. And sure, it's that. Um, one of the one of my grandfather's largest contributions to the world, I think, was in enlarging this category of what we consider media to be, uh, beyond simply just communications tools, and actually to everything that people do. The subtitle of his book, Understanding Media, is The Extensions of Man. Uh, and this is his first definition of what media are, is they're extensions of ourselves. Um, he put it another way. Some people get hung up on the word man, which really just was a short form for humans, but uh, he said extension of human powers, and that's perhaps an easier way to understand it. Any technology is really just a way of doing something that we already do, but doing it a little more efficiently or faster or easier, this kind of thing for an advantage. But really, we are the source of all these things. Is actually Ralph Waldo Emerson in the end of the 19th century who said that the body is the magazine of invention, the source of all these things. And so one definition of medium is a technology is just an extension or amplification of a part of us. Um, that is actually a radical departure. The the reason why it's the message is that um, the telephone didn't change the world by the conversations people had on it. You know, this these various media, there's actually a lot of media we're using right now. Zoom, for example, or whatever else. Video conferencing didn't change the world because people, gossiped about neighbors or had a birthday party. It changed the world because now you didn't have to go into the office. You could have a meeting from home, do a lot of work from home. It meant a reorganization of our work in social and personal lives. And this happened by the nature of the technology itself, less than by the individual uses to which it's put. That's why the medium is the message, because it is this medium that is responsible for the lion's share of restructuring that goes on within ourselves and socially, and also reorganization in the order of technology as well. But another word that he used for medium, a little bit after understanding media, is he said, if I say environment, that is a better way of saying medium. Actually, if you look it up in the dictionary, kind of environment or milieu or culture is one of the later definitions of medium, like a growth medium.
So,
Medium environment.
so a medium is like TV is a medium, radio is a medium, print, a book is a medium. But also, what you're saying is that a shirt or a blazer clothing is a medium.
Yeah.
Glasses are a medium. Sneakers, a car is also a medium. All of these things are mediums because they help enhance a human function. Is that
Well,
and that is and so it's not about the shows that are on TV. It's TV itself that is the main thing that influences the way that people think. Is that it?
yeah, these media, which is actually the plural of medium. Mediums are a whole other thing. Uh, but media are extensions of ourselves. And they change us not by the individual uses to which they're put, but by the effect that they have, what they make possible and what they make impossible. Like clothing, for example, is an extension of our skin. It's our skin, it encloses us, and clothing is an extension of our skin and our body heat regulation, right? Because of clothing, I can, bundle up and go outside and not freeze to death. Um, in understanding media, Marshall suggests that, people who don't wear clothes have to eat a lot more in order to keep their energy up. But clothing, by keeping your heat in, allows you to conserve your energy a little bit. But clothing is a great example because we so often get distracted by the content, and it kind of blinds us to the effect of the medium itself, of the technology and what it affords. It doesn't matter if I'm wearing a shirt that says, just do it, or wearing a sweater that doesn't say anything at all. It has nothing to do with the function of the item of clothing and doing its job in allowing me to do things or not. Or take something like air conditioning, right? Uh, there would be very few people living in Florida were it not for air conditioning. And it doesn't matter whether you're air conditioning your home or my home, or my work, or this workplace or that workplace. Air conditioning as a service changes things and changes us as it happens as well. So
Can I ask you a question on that up to this point? Because you are enlightening me a little bit on the statement, and I'm understanding it in a very different context than how I had understand it based on conversations Justin and I had in the past. And it's clear that every one of these media, you've described them, has its own impact on ourselves and on our society, and there's a message within that. It's a very different understanding than I previously had of the statement, where I got stuck previously, and maybe other people have also, is I think about, I don't know, let's say YouTube as the medium, right? YouTube has had all kinds of societal effects on us as individuals in society. What they are, we could debate all day long, but I think everyone agreed that it's had a big effect, right? But within every one of those individual videos that we watch on YouTube, each one has its own individual message. So I guess where I'm maybe misunderstood, or maybe there's levels of understanding the statement, is I tend to be a little bit of a literalist, as Justin will attest as we have conversations about these things. I always saw it as like, no, like if I'm watching YouTube and that's a medium, every single video has a different message for me. So how can the medium be the message? Because it negates the individual message of each thing. So it sounds like there are tiers. I would almost think of the statement now as the medium is a message, right? But then there's a whole nother level, because within each media, there is also different messages coming on the more micro level of the specific message that's being portrayed. Is that correct?
Yes. Marshall never said that content didn't matter or wasn't important. But when it comes to reorganizing society, that doesn't happen on the content level. With, a few examples, but generally, the change in Marshall put it this way. He talked about the change in the scale or pace or pattern that it introduces into human affairs. And that change in scale, that change in pace, the change in pattern, the way that we behave, of the way we do things, that happens because of the technology, because of the medium, not because of the various contents of YouTube videos.
So the bigger message, the macro message, is tied to the medium, and then all the specific content of every video, we'll say, is less important. It's the micro. It's not as impactful on us as a society as the medium itself.
Yeah. When it comes to changing who we are on a fundamental level, the medium is pulling the strings. Individual pieces of content might steer you, might persuade you, but media change your perception, not just these lighter kinds of things, but the way that you think about things, your preferences, your values, your identity. All these things really, and this does get to a deeper conversation, but the way that technologies work is by affecting us on a sensory and cognitive level. This has nothing to do with how you feel about something, or rather it does, but it doesn't have to do anything with opinion. Whether you approve of it or not has nothing to do with it. The way that Marshall put it, I think, brilliantly in Understanding Media, when he hijacked a statement of T.S. Eliot. T.S. Eliot was talking about meaning in poetry. Marshall said that content is like the juicy piece of meat used by the burglar to distract the watchdog of the mind. So content, the burglar wants to get into your house, but you got this guard dog. So he carries a steak with a sleeping potion in it or whatever, and he throws that, and the dog happily, consumes that while the burglar goes in and rearranges your furniture. Well, in the case of technology, the content keeps your awareness occupied, while the technology actually affects you on a sensorial level and a cognitive level. You may have heard the sister statement that we shape our tools and thereafter they shape us. Well, this is how technology shapes us, because it literally rewires us on a fundamental perceptual, cognitive, sensory level. And this is actually a very profoundly important thing. And the easiest way to explain it is this. We as human beings are the sum of our senses. Our senses are really our media. They're what go between the exterior world and our interior world. Everything that we know, all of our experience comes through our senses, one sense or another. If you think about that, you'll see or hear or understand where I'm going. The thing is, it's a very complicated thing because we have all these individual senses. We see, we hear, we taste, lots of others. And our senses actually all work together too. This is something that isn't commonly understood, but our senses exist in a balance, in a ratio. I swear I'm going somewhere with this. It's kind of dry, but it's very important. Our senses, this ratio, this balance among them, actually adds up to who we are, what we like and don't like, what we prefer, what's pleasing, what we value, hold important and dear. And the easiest way to illustrate this is to think about a blind person. So there's this guy, Jacques Luciran, who wrote this book, And There Was Light. And he describes how he was injured in a schoolyard accident as a young child. And the wonderful thing is he describes how as his visual faculty dimmed, his other senses came alive. He could no longer see, but all of a sudden he could hear more acutely. He could touch He could feel through his fingers more better. He could hear. And all these things added up to actually make him see the world in a new way. But this illustrates the point that when you affect one sense, you affect all the senses, because our senses exist in this balance. And why I say we're the sum of our senses is, if you think about a blind person, the blind person doesn't care what color your sweater is. It doesn't care. He or she doesn't care about the color of your walls. They probably would prefer texture than paint on a wall surface. They don't care about visual art. They wouldn't care about the Mona Lisa or half of the things in the Louvre. But we, as sighted people, hold visual values very tightly. We care about visual art. They're a big part, most people would agree, of what we value culturally, if not personally. But all this is entirely dependent on our sensory lives. The point being that our senses are not static things. This is where conventional theories of communication fall short, because our senses aren't just pipes that messages pass through. They're living, breathing things that are affected by what passes through them. So, we stare at screens. These things shape our senses individually and change them in ratio or equilibrium among, I know it's getting really complicated, but all this is wrapped up in the notion that it is the medium is the message, because it's the structure, the nature of the technology that has this effect. The content is really only there to hold our attention, like the juicy piece of meat, while the media do their work.
Mm-hmm. I think
And that's all wrapped up in those five words.
It's a long explanation and it's very deep, but I actually have a much deeper, I believe, better and deeper understanding of what it means now. So I appreciate that. Thank you.
There you go. So that's my short answer for anybody. Well, why should I care about that? Because the media.
I want to kind of pull a little bit of a Gossage moment here and say kind of, okay, here's what Andrew meant there. Because, Marshall worked with a lot of interesting people, and one of the people that I believe he did lectures with was Tony Schwartz, who was a big, also a believer in like the McLuhan method, who was a sound engineer, who did a lot of famous ads. He did that, the countdown ad for Johnson, where the nuclear bomb goes off. And he was famous. The way he explained Marshall McLuhan, at least the way that it affects advertising, is that, before television and radio, the way that you gave information was you wrote something down on a piece of paper, you fold it up, put it in an envelope, you put it on a ship, the ship went out, right? And maybe it got to America, maybe it got to Europe, maybe it didn't. The idea of relaying information from one person to another, or a message from one person to another, involved labor, right? And so even when you were just talking to somebody to try to persuade them or convince, like that was the framework in which you had in your mind about how a message is supposed to be delivered. When radio and television comes along, it all of a sudden doesn't become you trying to get your message into somebody else's head. It becomes, right, because that's not the way TV tower is, like a circle, right? It's not a straight line. And so what that does is that changes your concept. It changes the way that people are used to getting information. And so it all of a sudden resonance becomes more important. So instead of, like, if you go on TV and you try to preach to somebody, it doesn't work as well as when you just layer like lots of syntax, over things, and you try to create an environment that pulls your idea out of them. It makes them feel it, and almost like it's their own idea. And it plays out in advertising, right? From the 60s to the 80s, the dominant advertising medium was television. And so the television, like the best commercials weren't like hard sell, weren't like buy this now. I mean, you had that. So it's not saying that it didn't work. But it worked better in a QVC format, right, than it did as a show, than it did as a commercial. The commercials were mostly like brand awareness plays, and that's why it worked so well. And when we shift back to the internet, right, which is a different medium, that environment, that sort of messaging doesn't work anymore. So the first time I ever heard the medium is the message was when I worked in advertising, and all there was print and television, and all of a sudden social media came and paid, banner ads and all this stuff. And people were just taking what worked on like the television and trying to do it online, and it didn't work. And a lot of people, I remember one of my bosses at the time was like, well, no, the medium is the message. We have to adapt. We have to adapt the message to the medium, because the medium is the message. Apparently, there's a system. It's called the Tetrad. Mm-hmm. And I want you to introduce the Tetrad for a moment. And then I want to talk about today and what's going on with media technology and stuff like that. So these predictions are wild. I mean, like, they're just it literally sounds like if you just took what he was saying and put it in present tense, be like, yeah, but he was saying this in the 60s, man, And so how is he able to do that?
Well, for one thing, he said, I'm very careful to only predict things which have already happened.
Okay, you're going to have to explain that.
Well, here's the thing is, he said something like the ordinary person lives about 50 years behind their technology. He was not your ordinary person. He said that he looks at the shape of things and makes deductions based on that. Like, if you see the rivers, this got this strong a current and it kind of heading in that direction, you might predict that you're going to end up on the other shore. It's not really that much of a prediction. He said, I'm very careful to predict things that have already happened. He's basically saying that there's a huge lag between cause and effect, and certainly understanding. And he insisted over and over that he was really just describing the present. And to us, it looked like the future. Now, this gets a little disturbing, though, honestly, because if you think about that, if you take him at his word, and, he did like to provoke, he actually said, I don't see any point in saying anything but controversial things. There's no other way to get people's attention. But if you do take him at what he was saying, because he did say this over and over and over, it is disturbing, because if he's describing his present in the mid-1960s, and to us, 60 years later, it looks like our present, what the hell is actually going on today? And that's unsettling to me.
Yeah.
Okay. So,
and what part of that do you mean when you say looking at today? Are you referring to our uses of technology and how that affects us, our politics,
the world around us?
Get all political here, but like, what do you mean?
If people can say, "Oh yeah, I see what he's talking about," that's today. Well, Marshall was talking about today, but that was 60 years ago.
Right.
So we're looking at today. We're looking at yesterday and thinking it's today.
Have you seen, I'm sure you've seen this clip of your grandfather in Australia talking about the rearview mirror. The rearview, people don't look into the rearview mirror in order to see to see what they've passed. They look into the rearview mirror in order to see what's coming. So is that kind of what you mean?
Well, I mean, this is paradox. Well, it's all paradox. The medium is the message is a paradox. But that's okay. It's actually a way of understanding things. Marshall actually, he had a project. He was trying to do something, and that was understand media. And I think critically, he felt that it could be understood. He said that there's absolutely, he gets called a technological determinist, and that's thrown around as a way to brush somebody off or to discount them. And to one extent, he was a technological determinist in that the medium is the message, that the technologies that we use shape who we are. In that sense, sure, he's a technological determinist. the crucial part is that he said there's absolutely no inevitability as long as we're willing to contemplate the situation. So he understood that technologies might appear to work like magic, but they're not magic. They're human. They're part of us. They're extensions of us. And they may be complex, but if we look at them, there are things we can understand about them. And he spent much of his career studying the nature and effect of technologies for the purposes, as he said, of prediction and control. So you brought up the Tetrad in laws of media.
Yeah, I was going to say, speaking of which, apparently there is this tool that almost anyone can use and apply to a technology in order to kind of not just predict the technology, but to really, truly understand it better. And it's called Tetrad.
He discovered by studying very carefully and deeply technologies. Actually, the wild thing is, to back up a little bit, is he was trained in literary criticism. He taught literature and poetry for media studies was his side hustle, which is kind of hilarious. But he essentially, he learned from some people in Cambridge University the structure of poetry and literature and its effect. And he basically took the things that he learned for looking at literature and applied them to culture and technology, and found that they had a lot in common. By studying technology really deeply, he found that all technologies do all kinds of things. But he also discovered that all technologies do certain particular things. They have things in common. One of them is that every new technology extends or amplifies some part of us. He discovered that at the same time, when you extend or amplify some part of yourself, when you introduced a new technology, you take over from what was the dominant technology. You make it obsolete. And that doesn't mean that it disappears. We have telephones, we have radio, we have television, but they're not running the show anymore, as you find out in advertising pretty quick. The audience moves. We still have those things, but they don't run it. They don't dominate. So every time you come up with a new technology, it amplifies or extends some part of us, and it displaces or takes over from something else. It gets set aside. Those are two things all technologies do. Again, another thing is that if you take any technology, any form, and you push it to its limits, there comes a tipping point where it reverses its characteristics and does usually kind of the opposite thing. Like, a car, for example, or a road, right? If you and your daughter get on the highway and you've got 50 cars on it, you can all get where you want to go. If you've got 500 cars on it, you slow down. If you've got 5,000 on it, nobody goes anywhere. You have a traffic jam, which is what you should be able to relate to in LA. A traffic jam being the absolute opposite of the intention of the highway, which is meant to enhance and speed the flow of traffic. Any form pushed to an extreme tends to reverse its characteristics.
Like the smartphone as a communication tool that ends up isolating us.
Well, sure, exactly. Instead of giving us information, you find 3 hours later that you're still scrolling through TikToks or whatever else. That's not really very helpful, is it? It's like alcohol. You have a couple of drinks and you're feeling okay, and you have 20 and all of a sudden it's the next day and you're in jail, But another thing he discovered was that, and this one's difficult, the other three, enhance, obsolesce, reverse, we can think about these. We can consider what part of us is extended technologically. We could think about what happens when you extend a new technology, how that will reorganize the existing structure of things. We can even imagine what would happen if we put too many cars on the highway at the same time. But all technologies also bring back a way of doing things from the past in a new form.
That's the hardest one to understand, I think.
Well, that's very hard, because that's not just a conceptual exercise. You have to know a lot about history. It requires knowledge. So that
the easiest example I have of that one is text messaging bringing back the telegram.
Sure. Telegraph. Yeah.
Telegraph,
Yep.
yeah.
in a new form.
In a new form.
With the highway, uh, it didn't occur to me. I'm going to give you the most Canadian example ever of this, but the highway enhances our ability to get from point A to point B. It takes over to a large part, from commuting. The train no longer serves the same function, for example, or busing. If you push it too far, if you put too many cars on at the same time, you get a traffic jam, or your commute, instead of being convenient, turns into a 2-hour thing. But what does it bring back from the past? And the funny part of the story is I have a dog who's a golden retriever, Camper, and me and Camper were walking out in the back field. And this was a winter or two ago. And there's a stream that we go over, and because it was winter, it was frozen, and we just walked right across it. But it hit me, and have you ever had that flash of inspiration when things click into place? And I remembered that in North America, there's a reason why our cities tend to be founded in harbors and the mouths of rivers. It's because before there were roads, the way that we got around in North America was on the river. Rivers were our highways. And a highway is kind of like a frozen river, which allows people to get from place to place to place. And so for me anyway, the highway brings back the river as a way of getting around in a new form.
And you can immediately see how thinking this by just taking any technology, any medium, any new thing, like we could do this to old things, cell phones in history. It's probably easy to sort of, do it in retrospect, but you could also begin to apply it to the new technologies that are coming out.
But this is the very important point, Justin, is that, as Marshall said in Understanding Media, when we know that technologies are going to do things, when we know the kinds of things we can do, they will do, we can think things out before we put them out. So if we know that any new technology is going to enhance something, obsolesce, going to reverse, going to retrieve, we can actually think about these things in the design phase of technology and account for them. And these, side effects that we talk about, the side effects always add up to be the main effects. I think about a commercial for Ozempic or something else, right? And you see this couple, in slow motion, hand in hand on the beach, and the seagulls are going overhead, and it's a beautiful day. And in the background, this guy's going rapid fire about all the awful stuff that's going to happen to you if you take this drug. Well, that's technology for you. But the thing is just because, yeah, but the problem is, we sell these things on the back of some minor convenience, but what comes along is all this inconvenience and really the cost of who we are and what we value. But the overwhelming point here is that unintended consequences aren't the same thing as unavoidable consequences. And if we know that technology behaves in certain ways, we can account for that. And there's absolutely no reason to be as stupid about technology as we are.
I would question that on the personal level, maybe on a societal level. On an individual level, I may choose to say, I'm not going to use a smartphone, or I'm not going to put social media in my smartphone, or I'm going to keep my kids off it.
I love that you said that, because
but Mark Zuckerberg still created these things, right? And they still exist, and they affect our society in a broader sense.
Yeah, Marshall was on this panel with W.H. Auden and Buckminster Fuller debating television back in the 70s. And Auden said the same thing. He said, I don't have a television, and I wouldn't dream of having one. And Marshall replied, well, you simply, suffer the consequences without enjoying any of the benefits. Because, sure, okay, you don't have a smartphone, but how are you going to make payments? How are you going to find where you're going? How are you going to do all these things? Because our society has reorganized itself around this device. And you not having one is more harm than help at this point.
Well, that maybe yes, maybe no, but I hear the point that you're making. I guess it challenges us in terms of, the decision making, as you were describing before. I guess as individuals, we don't get to make those decisions. We can make it in the microverse. But the technology, somebody will create it. Some of them will take action society. We will use them. And we're just along for the ride.
So now we have a really good understanding of the medium as the message, what that means, its various implications. And we have a framework in which to apply understanding the medium better, both, before, during, and after it's that technology or media's launch, to understand things better. And by using the Tetrad, and I would also say well, I guess the part about the past, the rearview mirror, fits that one part of the Tetrad of what it brings back. So by understanding the Tetrad, so I think the big question on everybody's mind and the big topic, and I'm sure you've been busy answering questions, is AI. When you throw AI into the Tetrad, what happens?
Well, it's a complex thing. Most of our electric or digital technologies are not just one thing, like the way that a fork extends, our hand or fingers' ability to shovel something up, right? They're mixtures of a lot of things. And actually, Chapter 5 in Understanding Media on hybrid media has a lot to say about that. What happens when you start compounding media together. The automation it's interesting that's the final chapter. And it does have a lot to say about AI automation. AI automates a lot of things, and it gives the appearance of consciousness without actually being conscious. It's like, I know somebody who has such an amazing memory, it makes him seem a lot smarter than he is, just because he's able to recall things.
That is such
It's
a
not
great...
it's not actually intelligence. It's just really quick. And it can be confused for the same thing, but it's, for me, intelligence implies a kind of synthesis and a kind of novelty. And the thing about AI is that it's amazing at pattern recognition and information storage and retrieval, and it gives the appearance of novelty without the substance of it. Because if it's like, I see a lot of academic papers, and every sentence has a number at the end of it with a footnote and a citation to two other papers. There's very, very little original thought in any of it. It's just bringing together citations to 20, 30, 40 other papers, which isn't to say that there isn't anything interesting in it. But I think a lot of it is actually use case kind of entertainment at the moment, and the real application or utility of it isn't quite there. But again, it's this entertainment that's kind of bringing us along for the ride. I actually think of the content as the delivery mechanism, because it's like, the spoonful of sugar that helps the medicine go down. Paradoxically, it's the content that delivers the effect by keeping our attention and keeping us occupied, and that's kind of what pushes it forward. But
can you put AI through the Tetrad, or if that's too general, like at least one of them, like OpenAI, an LLM, or Midjourney, or anything like that?
Sure, we could talk about it. I love doing Tetrad exercises with people. It's actually, I find it's better in a group, because more minds to come up with.
So let's do it.
Sure. So LLMs, for example.
LLM. So it's an extension of let's assume a non-conscious, because we have the answer from your grandfather. If it's conscious, then it's an extension of our consciousness, whatever that means.
So one quick thing to say about the tetrad, as it's called. The tetrad just means a group of four things, or my grandfather and father called it the laws of media, because they're general principles that, like gravity, apply to everything. There haven't been any cases found where those four things don't apply in terms of human technology. But every technology, there isn't necessarily just one answer, right? Especially given something like an LLM. It amplifies or enhances several things. For example, memory, right? It's like our language, right? Language is a large model in itself, right? It's made up of thousands and thousands of parts, words, that we can string together in in infinite combinations, right? So an LLM enhances, let's say, language, process of thought, spoken word, I guess, written word, obsolesce. Obsolesce and enhance can sometimes mirror each other, right? Because and part of the reason for that is anytime like you were saying about advertising, anytime we come up with a new technology, we tend to use it to do the old thing before we come up with a new thing to do it. But when you think about technologies in terms of language, it becomes pretty clear that you can't really, that's not what it's for, right? In terms of advertising, you can't just translate the way you used to advertise in print with the way you need to advertise online, because it's like trying to speak English to somebody who understands Polish. Like, it's not really going to work. But LLMs relieve us of a lot of the responsibility of coming up with ideas, right? Let's say the rough draft. It obsolesces the rough draft, because you can say to the LLM, GPT or whatever, write me a paper about the effects of technology based on the Tetrad in the style of Marshall McLuhan. And boom, it comes out with something. Now, what it comes out with isn't going to be a final product. It's going to be at this point, a little bit rough. You're going to want to do work on it. So that's why I say it obsolesces maybe the rough draft, because, all of a sudden you've got something to work with, right? Now, if you push that too far, if let's say you ask Chat GPT to do everything, certain things are going to atrophy, let's say. You're going to lose a lot of creativity, this kind of thing. So rather than enhancing your creativity, you're going to lose creativity. Maybe that's one for the reversal. And retrieve. What might an LLM retrieve from the past in a new form? Maybe brainstorming. Maybe collaboration.
Brainstorming. I guess brainstorming is sort of obsolete with everybody at home now, right?
Yeah, I think actually collaboration, co-authorship, the idea of working together to produce something is brought back in a new form, because here you have a instant co-author or secretary, right? It's like write me a first draft of this. Kind of brings back the secretary or the grad student, maybe, in a new form. That's an idea, perhaps, of some of the parts of the Tetrad. I don't know. Do you disagree? Agree?
Well, it's interesting as you're talking about it. I think about it in terms of a lot of different things, but especially in terms of advertising, marketing, and building personal brands. One of my things I was actually debating this with Aaron yesterday. We like to argue a lot. Is that when I say that one of the examples I give is like Gary Vaynerchuk. Gary Vaynerchuk spent years and years and years building his personal brand, his persona, his style, everything. And so if he goes onto ChatGPT and basically trains it a little bit about himself and then says, okay, right? He likes to write about it, but even if he doesn't train it on himself, he likes to write a lot about empathy, right? So he's like, give me 365 short, aphorisms about empathy, right? And it spits out 365. And without even looking at them, he just cuts and pastes them and schedules them to go out on X, LinkedIn every day, right? He's going to get thousands and thousands and thousands of impressions and likes and whatever on those things because he's already built his personal brand. And if he uses AI, AI is very good at mimicking him. It is very good at mimicking and copying what already exists and stuff like that. It can't copy what doesn't exist, right? It can't. It needs to train. It has something to train on. So I tell a lot of people who are in the beginning. So a lot of the people, like say on LinkedIn, they're like, build your personal brand quickly. Use AI. Go to the Genius Scouts podcast, scrape it, copy it, and put it into my ChatGPT filter, and it'll spit out a month's worth of content. And like you said, it's atrophying yourself, right? You're not building a personal brand. You're not doing anything. I don't mean to be harsh about it, but so when I guide people who are just beginning their personal brand journey, I'm very honest with them. And there are people who naturally have a persona, who naturally have a gift and stuff like that. But if you don't, then I say, you cannot use AI. Won't touch it. Write everything by, in fact, I want you to write everything by hand with a pencil. All your posts before you even type it. It's so extreme because you need to, and I want you to read more. And I want you to steal people's information with your mind. I want you to do what Abraham Lincoln did, which is he would read an idea and he'd be like, simplify it until his father could understand it. And that's the only way that he would say, like, okay, now I understand it. Like I want you to do that and not touch AI. And then slowly your persona is going to come around because, and then you can use AI to amplify that. And the second thing is what you said with the Tetrad is, people say that the future of the economy is it's going to be an attention economy. But I think we're already beginning to see that what it's really going to be is a presence economy. You're right. I can't even tell you how many times I've had DMs back and forth, and I'm like, wait a minute, give me proof of life. I want to know that I'm not talking to an AI. I also want to know that I'm not talking to an assistant. Give me proof of life. I want to see that you're a real person. And I think that my wife was telling me that she doesn't pay attention to any of this stuff, but she's beginning to notice AI. And she's like, I can tell immediately when an Amazon review is written using AI. And I'm like, how? I can't tell you. I can't explain it. Right. And so far I have a 9 out of 10. I can look at an image and tell almost right away when it's AI. I get a little bit distracted when it's a beautiful woman because I think that the AI people, they use beautiful women on purpose because it does something to the brain, right? That impairs your judgment a little bit. But even then, there's something about it. I can look at it and say, that's AI. I can't explain it. I think there's an important thing in the aspect that I can't explain it. And I think the AI people forget that the more advanced they make this, the more advanced we become at detecting it. And I think that what's going to happen is that it's like nobody likes receiving a Hallmark card, right? Condolences, sorry for the death, of your loved one. And then they just sign it at the bottom. And I think never before in advertising has the perceived effort ever had to be anything, maybe with stock image photography, but any ad, good or bad, at least someone put effort into trying to communicate with me. But with AI and automation, you can literally do no effort. And I think that it's going to begin to hurt a lot of brands when people can start telling, unless it's done on purpose, like the AI, it's going to hurt a lot of brands and not just from a marketing perspective, communication, sales, all of it. The minute I can tell that there's AI, I've lost trust. So we're going to begin to see this like raw need. And so I think that is also one of the things that what you just said about the pushing it too far, part of the Tetrad. The
Well,
one back is, I don't know how we even think about that. It's like a whole other episode.
it's funny because there's so many ironies about it that AI makes it possible to reach every individual person with a specifically tailored message that is absolutely impersonal.
Yes, I receive that daily.
You know,
Yeah.
which is a great irony. Using AI to build your personal brand actually creates you into the most average person available. So it's personal bland more than a brand.
Yes.
It's
Yeah,
like if you want to build a brand, if you want to be interesting to people, you have to do some interesting things. Like, you know, get out and have some experiences, maybe develop an opinion. Because just like the images, it becomes pretty, obvious the equivalent in thought. It's like you've heard it before. It's not very new, and nobody wants to. It's boring.
So what are you up to now, Andrew? Like, so you're teaching your grandfather's works, but you're also consulting. You're also speaking. You also have your own views. I think we're just going to have you come out on another episode because I have tons more questions. Like, I want to actually know what you disagree with your grandfather. Like, I want to know more about Andrew, but I really want to know more about Andrew McLuhan. Like, what are you doing right now? What would you like to be doing right now? I think that like basically every CEO on this planet should be having you in their boardroom or as an advisor, and should just be like constantly asking you questions um, about things. But what are you up to?
Well, one of my favorite things to do is just basically have coffee or drinks with people, and have conversation and expand their mind, expand their possibilities, broaden their perspective. Because the more perspectives you have, a single point of view doesn't make any kind of understanding. It takes volume and context, and I have a lot of that. So that's one of my favorite things to do. And tutoring people, teaching classes. I do some consulting. I teach groups on tetrads and laws of media and other things like that. How to understand technology differently, maybe better. Um, One thing, I actually just got a kind of small grant, which is going to allow me to concentrate on the book that I've been trying to put together for ages. On the medium is the message. Funnily enough, Marshall put out that book, The Medium is the Massage. So I was going to title my book, The Medium is the Message, because it hadn't been used. It's never even been trademarked, if you believe that. If we had a dollar for every time somebody said the medium is a message. But this is the irony of my position, is I inherited such a rich intellectual legacy and like zero financial instruments to make it, to bring it forward, which is fine. It means I have to be a bit scrappy and figure things out on my own, which again is fine.
But you're not on your own. You have Genius Scouts. We're here to help you.
No, and actually, really though, I'm not on my own, because a lot of people have helped me get this far, and a lot of people are really believe in what I'm doing and am helping me get forward by little consulting gigs and essays here, and I'm helping design a few different classes for people right now in American institutions and things like that. But I want to put out this book on the medium as a message, because I truly believe that if the world understood what that meant, we would demand better from technology companies and from governments, the way that we demanded better from pharmaceutical companies back in the 20th century. It's amazing that technology is, for all intents and purposes, unregulated in terms of the actual effects that it has. So yeah, working on my book, going to hockey practice making some maple syrup.
I think you're being way too humble here. I got to tell you right now that every time I speak with you, and I'm rare. I have a little bit of open access to you, and I throw questions at you all the time. Usually, like a lot of times, I'm having a problem with the LinkedIn algorithm or understanding my posts aren't doing so well, and I'll just ask you a question about it, and then you'll say something. Oh my God, I just never thought about it that way before, and so then I just start doing my posts again. I forget, you said something to me once, about like, oh, well, if the dwell time is the most important, then you have to, remember it's not necessary. Like you have to write stimulating content, but you have to, make it so that people are physically, not just with the eyes, but they're physically doing it. And so like I started creating these like 70 or 80 slide carousels because of something that you said. And so I think that more people just need to know that. Like literally, if you have a problem, if you're like a CEO and there's just something going wrong with your marketing, there's something going wrong with the technology, the app, you can't figure something out, or you have this amazing AI technology, but you don't know what to do with it. Like there's nobody on the planet other than Andrew McLuhan that you should go and speak to. Not even Elon Musk. You shouldn't even ask Elon Musk. You should be asking Andrew McLuhan Elon Musk should be asking you what you should. Maybe he is. I don't know. But I should honestly believe that.
I appreciate that. It is I do seem to have a talent for looking at things differently. And one of my favorite things is somebody, like you say, it does happen. People come to me and ask what I think about this, that. And I tell them something or maybe 5 things, and I get back that head exploding emoji, and I know my work is done,
And you could be charging premium for that.
I know. I had a guy consult me for a book, right? And he paid me a rate for an hour of my time to talk about it. He sent me over the draft. I looked it over. I came prepared. 3 minutes into the conversation, he's like, this is great. You've given me my money's worth, but can we still just talk for the rest of the hour? I'm like, yeah, for sure. But oftentimes we get so stuck in these little feedback loops. And one of the privileges is that I sit here in this barn, which has 5,000 books in filing cabinets in art and 3 generations of exploration and discovery. And I have the privilege of being the medium between this and you. So I'm pretty happy.
That's awesome. Like I said, I think more people should be reaching out to you, and I think we're just going to have you on as a guest again. Actually, it would be really interesting, Aaron, if we actually had him as a third wheel on some guests, like we have another guest on, and we just have Andrew just sitting there listening and then throwing out some wild questions. But
Andrew pulled me behind the movie poster like Woody Allen,
Oh, and so basically what I'm saying is that I think people should have an Andrew McLuhan behind a plant, and be paying him. You should be able to do that with Andrew McLuhan, like at any time. Really, honestly, truly, I brought him into projects. I brought you. Sorry, you're right here. I brought you into projects, and you just completely transform the conversation and the way people are thinking about things. So, Andrew, I didn't even get to half the questions that I wanted to get to. We're probably going to have a lot of requests to have you back on. Hopefully, a lot of people reach out to what is the best way to find you?
I'm pretty easy to find. I'm very active on Twitter, which is my word playground. Andrew at themcluhaninstitute.com, where I may see your email or it may get lost in the shuffle pretty quickly. If you're in the Prince Edward County area, drop by. I'd love to see you. I'm reachable. I'd love to hear from you.
I could say for one that you've expanded my perspectives and given me a much deeper, better understanding on I've got a long ways to go to catch up with the two of you.
Well, then I've done my job. Thanks, Aaron and Justin. It's been great talking to you and whoever's listening.
Thanks for tuning in to the Genius Scouts podcast. Be sure to subscribe for more episodes, and if you're ready to take your personal brand to the next level, visit geniusscouts.com.